everyone, my name is Zach REDRUP, you're listening to the It's Not a Phase podcast, and on this episode I'm joined by Joe Naan, who's a publicist over at Nuclear Blast Records and SharpTone Records. We talk about how he got into the music industry, what a music publicist does, the highs and lows of the job, advice on how to follow a similar career path, projects that he's working on at the moment, and loads more. Now, if you enjoyed this or any other episode of the podcast and you want to show your support, there's a few ways that you can do that. Number one, leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to this. It takes just a few seconds and it really does help. Number two, share this on your social media, whether that be Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever. Or number three, if you want to go the extra mile, you can pay a little bit each month to join the Patreon, and in return you'll get access to episodes early along with some other perks, or you can pick up some merch from the store. All the links to that and the podcast socials where you can follow us can be found at itsnotaphase.co.uk. That's itsnotaphase.co.uk. And now with all that out of the way, let's jump right into this week's episode of It's Not a Phase. What's up everybody? Thank you for joining me on this episode of It's Not a Phase, where I'm joined by Joe Naan, who is a publicist over at Nuclear Blast Records and SharpTone Records. And I guess as like a kind of side hustle, you're a Dua Lipa superfan as well. So,
oh my god, I was like, I know that's going to come up at some point, but I don't know how he's going to slide it into the conversation. Right. And of course, it's like the first thing you bring up. Yeah, I am. She's great. She's the best. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I'll try not to talk about Dua Lipa too much. I'll try and keep it more to like the relevant stuff.
What's the contact?
But I make no promises.
Well, yeah, thanks for coming on. And I know you're like a really busy guy, so, you know, dealing with all these bands, which we'll obviously dive into in a moment. But I guess let's go to the very beginning of that journey in terms of, you know, getting into the music industry. And I guess what was your kind of introduction into getting into heavier music, I suppose?
Yeah, so it's a bit weird for me, actually. Like, I was quite late to music in general. I grew up around quite a lot of music because my dad is like a massive muso. He's literally got like books of like every number one ever and just sits and reads them. It's a bit weird. No, bless him, he's great. So I grew up around quite a lot of music, like Daft Punk and Gorillaz and like Linkin Park and stuff when I was a kid, which I always liked and I always would like ask to be put on in the car and stuff like that, but never really made the connection that like I liked it because that bloke was screaming or whatever. Yeah. And then I was at secondary school and there was a bunch of lads in my year that were like into like Slipknot and Lamb of God and stuff. And I have a lot of shame saying this, but I was that guy that was like, how do you listen to that? It's just screaming. It's just noise. That's stupid. Blah, 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 blah.
I've got to start somewhere, dude.
I know, yeah. I just feel like such a knob for that. And then just one day I was on YouTube. I think I was like 15. And I got like a recommendation for the Wait and Bleed video by Slipknot and was like, I guess I'll give it a go, like see what this is all about. And then watched that and was like, it's actually kind of cool. Like there's something about this. I don't know what it is, but there's something about this. Watch like 2 or 3 more videos. And then within like maybe like a month or so was like in at the deep end and was, yeah, I mean, Slipknot was my first love in music really. And for probably a good year or so, I only really listened to like Slipknot, Ben Sevenfold, Disturbed, System of a Down, Bullet for My Valentine, like all the kind of like big hitters of that time, like sort of mid 2010s era. And then funnily enough, I had a mate who introduced me to A Day to Remember, and I was like, I like the singy bits, but the screaming's like, it's a different kind of screaming. And again, I was like, it's a bit too much. And then eventually I kept listening to it because I liked all the chorus, like all the verses and all the sung parts. And then it clicked. And then within about a year from that, I was listening to like Nails and Converge and Gojira and just went in and tried to find the most obscure, like challenging, weird shit I could. And
you dove in pretty deep, pretty quickly then, like in the space of a year going to that extreme, I guess.
Yeah, like there was definitely like a teething period where I did just like, when I first got into all that stuff, I definitely did just listen to like System of a Down and like still great bands. Like I still like a lot of those bands. First 3 Bullet records especially, absolutely slap. But then, yeah, as soon as I kind of had that, like, I think I just needed my horizons like broadened ever so slightly. And I just needed that like one thing, kind of like that initial thing with Slipknot where I kind of just needed that dam to break and then go, oh, actually, I like this thing. I kind of just needed that to happen a second time and go, and then it kind of clicked. And I was like, why am I putting up these barriers for myself for like all these things I could potentially love? And then just very quickly went down a rabbit hole for the next however many years of just trying to listen to like any and everything that I could find. Had like a Metal Hammer subscription, used to listen to loads of podcasts and like watch loads of YouTube videos and documentaries and all that sort of thing, and just try and listen to like as much as possible because I was just like completely obsessed with it. But yeah, then ended up stumbling down the whole thing of like trying to find who's the heaviest band ever. You know, you constantly do that thing where you first hear Slipknot and you're like, this is insane, nothing's ever going to be heavier than this. Then someone's like, have you heard Lamb of God? And then you go down there, and then someone's like, have you heard of death metal? And you're like, well, actually. And yeah, before you know it, you're listening to just like noise records that are only available on tape or on Bandcamp. And then you maybe have to think, have I gone too far?
Recorded in the corner of a shed.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a bit of a wild little journey, but I remember it very fondly. Feels like it was forever ago now. Jesus.
I think mine was like I heard my brother playing One Step Closer by Linkin Park.
Huge.
Just him screaming "shut up," and I was like, I never heard that on the radio before. Like, why is he screaming "shut up"? And within a few years, like I was listening to like the number 12, Looks Like You, which is a bit more extreme.
Yeah, again, that's a bit of a leap. Yeah.
Like,
I do think that's like, I do think there's something to that of like, especially when you're younger and you're like getting into this stuff, and there is, I think a lot of people that are into heavier music can probably relate to this, where there is an appeal from like the fact that it is scary and dangerous and different. And so you kind of chase that feeling for a while, and like obviously you become a little bit more familiar or like desensitized to certain things. So like I say, like when you get into Slipknot and it's 9 blokes in masks and you hear all the stories about like huffing the crow and all that mad shit, and then you kind of start to like, you get a bit used to that. So then you try and find the next thing that sparks that like sense of danger within you. Like, you know, you find like videos of the Dillinger Escape Plan breathing fire on stage and stuff, and you're like, that's mental. I want to find out what that's about. So I totally understand the like, I think a lot of people probably have that similar thing of like getting your entry point and then just taking a wild leap, and just like you say, going from Linkin Park to number 12 is a mad step, but like I can totally get it at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's just once you've lifted that kind of lid of, there's this kind of world where screaming is kind of like the norm in music, and it's like, okay, so if this has happened, what else happened to you? It just expands and expands from there, I think.
If that's the like base level, there's got to be some other weird shit I can find. And then the hunt is endless. That rabbit hole goes on forever.
Yeah.
Until you end up finding like, you ever heard of the bands Hatebeak and K9us? That's one of my favorite personal little finds. One of them, I think K9us, was it? One of them's a side project of one of the guys from Pig Destroyer.
Right.
Basically, these two bands did a split together. Hatebeak is a band that's fronted by a parrot, and K9us is a band that's fronted by 2 pit bulls. They obviously didn't play live, they just recorded stuff. But it's just like grindcore with animal noises over it, and it's not very good, to be honest, but it's a good laugh.
Yeah. I think they put one song out, but I'm pretty sure when Artery Recordings was a thing, they signed a pug as a band. I can't remember what they were called. It might have just been called Pugcore or something, but
yeah. Checks out.
Yeah.
Checks out. Nice.
But so I guess from there, especially like going from my experience, like I didn't know until like later on down the line that I love music, I want to be a part of it, but I didn't know that there were these kind of like behind the scene roles such as a publicist that exists. I'm like, I could actually do that and be involved in that kind of thing. So at what point did you learn about that kind of career path and then start taking steps towards it, I guess?
To be completely honest, I went to college, like 6th form, and hated it. It just wasn't for me at all. I kind of realized that academia maybe wasn't the path I wanted to take. So I dropped out, and I did an apprenticeship working in IT for a little while, because I was like, basically because I grew up sitting on my computer every night listening to music and playing games. So I was like, I know how to do IT, easy. And then hated that as well. I was like, this sucks. And then was basically in a position where I was like, okay, I kind of have to make a decision for what I want to do for the rest of my life, sort of thing. And the only thing I could think of is, well, music is the one thing that I like really give a shit about, and that I feel like I care enough about to go and pursue something and try and make that work. And so honestly, quite literally, I just went on Google and searched for jobs in the music industry, like just definitions of different jobs in the music industry, and looked through them. And, you know, there's obviously a bunch of stuff that comes up that you think, okay, well, I probably need to be a bit more qualified for that. Bear in mind, I just had GCSEs and nothing else really. And then I saw a description of a publicist or a PR, And it essentially just said you need to be like passionate about music and you need to be good at talking and building and maintaining relationships. And I was like, usually for my sins, I talk too much. Like I have a bit of a problem of being a bit of a motor mouth, which maybe we'll come across on this. We'll see. You know, at that point, I'd spent the last like 4 or 5 years just obsessing over music, especially like heavy music. So I kind of found my niche, and you didn't really need any specific qualifications or anything. So I quite early on just went, I guess I'll try and make that work. So it was all a bit luck of the draw,
right?
But has obviously worked out okay. So I'm not complaining by any means, but yeah, it was like a real just like, okay, I just want to try and find a way to make this work. So I just looked and tried to find what I felt was the most logical way in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what was your first foray into publicity? Like, what was your first publicist role?
So my first, I was an intern for 3 months at this company called Impressive PR that did mostly kind of like regional comedy stuff and some more like nostalgic music stuff that was like a lot of like 80s kind of, you know, those tours you see where it's like, here's like one member of a band that you kind of remember from the 80s alongside like 4 other of the same kind of acts, and they would just tour together.
Yeah.
Like those kind of package tours. So it was a lot of that sort of stuff, which, you know, didn't particularly excite me, if I'm being completely honest. That probably doesn't come as much of a surprise, but, you know, it was a start, and like that was good enough for me at that point. Absolutely not complaining again. Like that was my foot in the door sort of thing. Did that for, like I say, like 3 months, ended up going and working in like the food in like, well, just working in like shops and stuff for about 6 months after that, just to pay my rent in London because it's not cheap.
Yeah.
And then got lucky enough to land myself a role as like a junior publicist and marketing assistant at Live Nation, which was quite a step up.
Small company, that one.
It's a little, you might have heard of them. Put on Download if you've heard of that. But yeah, so that, I mean, that was kind of surreal. Like, I feel very lucky because I know a lot of people in or similar positions to me that had to intern for years and years. And if I'm being completely honest, I don't really agree with the whole intern culture. It's a little bit, what's the word?
Exploitative.
Yes, exploitative. That's exactly the word I was looking for. Yeah, it's like, I don't think it's all bad. Like, there are definitely things you learn from interning, despite the fact I only did it for a few months. But on the whole, like this whole idea of like, you know, it's the classic thing of like, you need experience to get the job, but you can't
get the job unless
get the experience without the, it's a horrible cycle.
Yeah.
So I feel super lucky that I was able to get into a job that quickly. But yeah, it was a wicked opportunity. I got to work on some nuts stuff. I worked on like the final Black Sabbath tour and like Rihanna's tours and Taylor Swift and stuff like that. And then also like smaller stuff. Made some good relationships with the kind of like rock and metal promoters and stuff there, because I was kind of, you know, this new kid that was super interested, excited about all the shows they were booking. And yeah, it was kind of crazy. So then, did that for like 2 years, which was really cool again, but then moved over to Nuclear Blast almost 6 years ago now, which is horrifying. But Nuclear Blast kind of feels like home to me, to be honest. It's like I was saying before, like my knowledge is in a niche. I love all music. I listen to all music. I mean, we've already touched on the Dua Lipa thing. We don't need to go back there. No. But like, I try and listen to as much stuff as I can, like kind of just to reference what I was talking about before of those, like breaking those walls down of like, I felt like I was blocking myself off from finding stuff that I would like. And that I've reached the point, obviously, after going through that kind of experience a couple of times where I was like, I'm not going to limit myself. If music is the thing I love, I'm not going to limit myself by genre or by style or by anything. Like, if something looks interesting or appeals to me or someone I trust says it's great, I'll give it a go. If I like it, amazing. I found something new that I can love. If I haven't, then fine, whatever, move on, go over it. There's plenty of stuff out there that you're going to love. But the reality is that my niche and my knowledge is heavy music. And that is where my experience is. That's where my heart is, to be honest. And so Nuclear Blast and SharpTone is, it feels very much like kind of where I'm supposed to be. And there's a reason I've been here for nearly 6 years now. It just feels like it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, being like a fan of heavy music, what better place to be than one of the biggest metal labels in the world? Yeah,
it's kind of nuts. Like, it's weird because it's like, I think to a lot of people, especially people that maybe don't appreciate our world and our side of music that much, when I say I worked at Live Nation, that always seems like the, holy shit, oh my God, like, oh, you worked on a Rihanna tour? That's crazy, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, that is cool. I'm not going to try and be like, all like, oh, woe is me, like I had to work on reality. But to me personally, like, this means so much more, and like I feel like you have more impact working at a label like this, even though we're obviously a big label. I'm not trying to say we're this tiny little independent, but feels like you're offering more value to the artists, and also because it's stuff that I love and stuff that I grew up with. Like, I remember saying in my first interview when I went for the job here that something I hadn't realized until I went back and looked through my record collection when I was going for the job is that so many of the records that I loved growing up were Nuclear Blast releases, and I just didn't clock it. Everything from like Bury Tomorrow, who were like one of my first bands that I got obsessed with, through to like I said, Nails, or like some of the old In Flames records, or like, they've covered so much stuff in the history of the label. So it really, and obviously SharpTone is a much newer prospect, but the stuff they've done the stuff we've done, I guess, in the short amount of time it's existed, is something that I think is really great, and like I feel very proud to be a part of it all, to be honest.
Yeah, I understand that like label mindset that you've said there. It's like when I was growing up, back when if you wanted music, you go out and buy a CD. Sometimes I'd be like, I don't know what I want to buy, but I look at the label and be like, well, I know that pretty much anything that comes from, let's say, Roadrunner, I know I'm going to like.
Roadrunner's always the one, isn't it? 90s Roadrunner is unreal.
That's how I kind of discovered bands that I love now. Like, I mean, I don't think they do anything now, but 36 Crazy Fists, one of my favorite metalcore bands of all time. Like,
yeah, and like that one,
all because of the label.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing as, it's also the, you pull out the booklet and look at what t-shirts the band members are wearing, or like stuff like that. I love all that stuff. I still do all that stuff. I still watch music videos by bands and then try and, wow, what's that t-shirt the bass player is wearing? Because I just love nerding out on like every aspect of it. I think it's the most fun thing. Yeah. But yeah, I totally get that. 100%.
So people listening who might not quite know what a publicist is and what a publicist does, how would you kind of describe that?
Yeah, it's kind of a tricky one, but I guess maybe the easiest way to tackle it is to kind of look at what publicity is first. And I think maybe the easiest way to present that is that it's essentially just another wing of marketing. It offers the same benefits in terms of awareness, and essentially as a label, we are a business. We're trying to sell records. So it is about getting the news about that record in front of customers or potential customers that will then be interested in that release by that band. But the way it differs from marketing is that although it is still somewhat transactional, it's not a case of, I'll give you X amount of money so that you can run half a page in a magazine as an advert, or, the adverts that you probably skip on YouTube after 5 seconds that pop up or whatever. Publicity is more a case of offering an artist time and their stories and their experiences in exchange for a platform that allows them to talk about their art or their record or their band, whatever it is. It's about positioning those artists in a place where they can kind of sell it themselves almost. They can kind of preach directly to their fan base or to people that are potential fans. And it just feels a bit more personal, I think. Obviously, marketing still has a place. It's in everything we do in life. It's in everything you see and experience and stuff. But I think publicity just kind of comes across a bit more genuine, a bit more real. And as a publicist, my role is then to kind of seek out those opportunities for those artists. Most of the time, it's going to be during a campaign. So during campaign will usually be kind of, if a band is releasing a record, the campaign will usually kick off between like 2 and 4 months ahead of the album coming out. And it is essentially just a period of time where, that's when all the singles are coming out. That's when you have the opportunity to pre-order the record, all that sort of stuff. But that's the time where you then kind of pitch into magazines or to podcasts like this one, or to web blogs or radio stations or whatever it is. And essentially my job is to sell that artist, sell that record, sell that song, whatever it is, to those people, let them know why I think that would appeal to their audience, their core audience of listeners or readers, whatever. And then try and essentially negotiate to get that artist the most coverage possible to help promote their new release, whether that's an EP or record or whatever. And obviously the same thing kind of comes into effect with touring, but is a bit less structured, I guess, for touring, because it's less of a like a timeline where you have these like beats of, single releases or other bits of news or whatever that's coming out. A tour is more just kind of like obviously trying to sell tickets to the tour, but also once the tour actually comes around, making sure people are aware of it. If it's a tour that's doing really well, make sure people see reviews of it, know that the band are on like great form, selling out big rooms, whatever it is, to just try and elevate their status, I suppose, in this world that we exist in.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the long and short of it. I'm sure if I've missed anything. But yeah, I feel like that pretty much covers it.
Yeah. Well, I guess that, even just in the 6 years you've been at that label, I guess what's, what you pitch towards, or who, people approach you to kind of cover the bands that you look after has changed a bit, right? So you're looking at like websites and magazines, obviously that's kind of been there from the beginning, but then you've also got like you say, streamers, and you've got maybe like influencers, podcasts, stuff like that. I guess that's kind of changed the landscape a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. I think the thing with press is it is somewhat volatile in this, like in 2024. Like, there was a time where magazines were king of the world, and like getting something in a magazine was greatest thing you could ever do. I mean, this was long before my time, to be completely honest. And I do think magazines still have their place and there is still value there, but like there's no denying that there's this whole new breed of different mediums or different streams essentially to position these artists in. Like you said, podcasts is a really big one. Even like reaction videos on YouTube and stuff like that, like that can really make a difference. I think, the most obvious example is probably Lorna Shore. They were a band for 15 years or something until Will joined and they put out that track. And then that part of that song absolutely blew up through reaction videos and TikToks and all that sort of thing. And it just drew so many eyes on that band, who then obviously went and listened, and, great band, had been a great band for a long time, I think. But it opened them up to this whole new audience. And I do think there is an element of, as an industry, we're trying to kind of fully understand and fully like find the best way to approach all of these new streams of possibility, but in the way that makes the most sense. You've got people like Nick Nocturnal as well that do Twitch streams and stuff of like highlighting new music releases and things like that. And it's essentially, I just view it as kind of like just how the newer generation is interacting with press, quote unquote. Because whether you can even call it press is, feels a bit loose. That term almost feels a bit outdated now. But yeah, the reality is that like a lot of new kids aren't going to be going and picking up magazines because it's not what they know. It's not what they've grown up with. They've grown up with their phones and like YouTube and stuff like that, which cool. Then let's find what makes sense to them to try and find these new artists and make sure that if there's a band that they're going to love, that they have some way of finding out about them and then hopefully connecting with it. And, the rest is history sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, obviously you work with Nuclear Blast and SharpTone. Nuclear Blast has, on the most part, like more well-known established artists. SharpTone's kind of like more new up-and-coming modern bands. And I guess when you're kind of pitching these artists to publications or whoever it may be, I guess in one way you've kind of got the reinforcement and seal of approval of being with a trusted label when you're putting these established acts forward. But I guess there's always those opportunities with putting them in eyes that haven't looked at them before, like maybe audiences that they don't normally go into. And even with that, the newer bands trying to convince even like the smaller publications, like, hey, you need to pay attention to a band like, I don't know, Profiler or Levels or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think the reality is that like nobody's heard everything, and that's just the truth. I try and listen to as much as I can and try and be as aware of everything as I can. I could list you 100 bands right now that I've heard of and never listened to because I just haven't got round to it. I won't do that. We don't have time. No. Yeah, like there's definitely an element of that. Like I think for older bands, especially, like it kind of ties into the last thing we were just talking about. If you're like more of a legacy band, like, we've got bands like Creator and Testament, like a lot of the old kind of like core thrash bands, Anthrax, stuff like that, then you're probably more used to being in magazines and that being how people get to know your music.
Yeah.
But there's this whole new generation that maybe know that as their parents' music or their older siblings' music or whatever it is, and are maybe aware of the names but haven't found their way to connect with that thing yet. And so I think it's just about trying to find ways to kind of not compromise what that band is, because I mean the worst thing you can do is get a band like that and then, like force them to make like silly TikToks or whatever, like they just don't fit their brand. And there's nothing wrong with TikTok. I spend about 7 hours a day on TikTok, but like it has to fit, it has to make sense with that artist and like who they are and their personality and all that sort of thing. So it can be tricky, but it's also kind of part of the job that's really fun, is trying to recontextualize these things for different audiences and like find ways that, like you say, you can introduce an older band to a younger audience, or even vice versa, potentially. Like a band like Profiler, like the obvious thing is to try and connect that to a newer generation, especially because it's a sound that's kind of, well, I mean, it's a sound that is, I think, is fresh and new, but is definitely drawing on influences from the 90s. Like they themselves talk about being influenced by the likes of Limp Bizkit and Korn, but also like Silverchair and Incubus and a lot of that 90s alternative scene. So on one side of that, you've got this new generation that maybe isn't actually as familiar with a lot of that stuff. You know, they've probably heard Limp Bizkit, they've probably heard Korn. I'd be surprised if many of them have listened to Silverchair. And so it's a way of kind of like introducing that sound to a new generation through, you know, a band that is also their age, that like has interpreted it in probably a similar way to how they will. But at the same time, you can then pitch that band to an older audience that does remember Silverchair and, you know, all of that sort of stuff, and be like, if you love that sound, look, it's still going, it's still out there. One of my pet peeves is, I'm sure you probably have the same, is when you hear people saying like, oh, there's no new good bands anymore. And it's like, yes, there is. There's so many. You just have to look for them. Yeah. And like, even if your issue is that you only like stuff that sounds like the 90s or the 80s or the 70s or whatever, there are loads of bands that sound like the 90s and the 80s and 70s. You just have to find them. You just have to put in minimal effort.
Yeah.
And you can find a whole world of stuff that you will love. And it really baffles me why, so this is a bit of a tangent now, but it really baffles me why there's so many people that like restrict themselves from finding all this stuff that they're going to adore. So yeah, like it's a challenge sometimes to try and introduce some of these bands to different audiences, or like to try and convince people to cover them. But it's part of the fun. You know, you got to try and understand people, what makes people tick, and then to an extent kind of play on that to just see what is going to fit where. And it's like a little puzzle, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I guess a lot of it's kind of beyond your control as well. Like, I know these aren't on the label, but if you look at a band like Sleep Token and Bad Omens, right? If you look at how they were maybe 2 years ago, barely anyone knew who they were. And now, outside your control, like, you know, TikTok or whatever it is, they've just blown up. And I guess then in that kind of circumstance, kind of like now people are fighting to coverage. And now you're then tasked with something different, which is like obviously can't give you interviews to everyone to speak to this band. And then I guess you've got a task of like prioritizing, one, obviously getting coverage for them, but two, I guess maintaining relationships with these publications, and then three, you know, what works for the band. Like you're not going to put a band like, I don't know, Bleed From Within in like, I don't like a pop website or whatever or something like that.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think kind of on the first point of what you were just saying, like I do think now more than ever, our job in the music industry is more reactionary than it was before, because it's less about, there was definitely a time when in the music industry you would kind of orchestrate these moments. You'd be able to, again, this is kind of before my time, to be honest, but you know, you can see it if you look back in the history of any genre of music, that things would be placed to happen at certain times to cause the most uproar or whatever, like discourse or whatever it was. You know, you look at the whole Blur Oasis thing back in like the 90s, early 2000s or whatever, and it's like it was definitely an element of the industry, you know, being involved in that and kind of setting some of that up because it generates that buzz. Whereas now I think it is more a case of almost like waiting. Obviously, you know, there's an element of you can play into that to some extent, but I think the way it really works the most is when it's organic. Like you say, a band like Sleep Token, it wasn't because, I mean, as far as I know, it wasn't because they were like playing the TikTok game like insanely well. It was just that they put out tracks that happened to work really well on that platform. And I think once that started to blow up, you saw that band reacted to that really well by like, I think they put out like a whole bunch of singles from that last record, which for a band like that is a great way to kind of maintain that attention. It kind of keeps people on the hook, which is a really difficult thing to do these days because, you know, everyone's being served a million different bands at once.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely more of a reactionary thing. And in regards to the second point of like kind of, there is definitely an element of, with a newer band, you're trying to just kind of break them in where you can, where people are going to buy into it and where people get on board. But then when something achieves a bit more success, you do want to kind of, you know, be a bit more strategic about how you play things and when things happen, just to kind of generate, you know, there is still an element of press that is public perception. Like a lot of magazine covers now, it is as much about the cover of the magazine as it is being able to put that on your Instagram. because if it's a magazine that's only available in the UK, but you've got fans in France or I don't know, Indonesia or America or wherever that see that on your Instagram, they're going to look at that and go, oh wow, that band's on the cover of a magazine. That band is a cover level band now. That's crazy. So there's definitely an element of being a bit more strategic and kind of making those plays. But also, like you said, it always has to kind of serve the bigger purpose. Like there's no point in me selling a death metal band into classic rock magazine, because we'll go through all that effort and they'll do the interview, in a hypothetical world where they accepted that pitch and went for it. Nobody who picks up that magazine looking to read about Pink Floyd or like Bon Jovi or whatever is going to pick it up and be like, cool, horrible death metal band with a disgusting name. This is for me. You know what I mean? Yeah, like you have to try and find where their audience is and like serve their audience. Because at the end of the day, it's for the reader, it's for the viewer or the consumer, the listener, whatever it is. Like you're trying to give that person something that they'll enjoy and connect with, so that then they kind of want to be more invested in that band or that record, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting.
So I guess adding on to that then, what does a typical day-to-day look like for you? I guess it would change depending on what band you're working with on that day and what is going on with said bands on that day. But I guess generally speaking, what does your day kind of look like?
Yeah, it does vary to some extent. And I think for me, being in-house at a bigger label is probably a little bit different to some other PRs, because we kind of have our entire teams internally. So we have digital marketing professionals, we have people who work specifically on radio, we've got A&Rs, we've got product managers. So like around each release, we'll have a whole team built up of people that all play a very specific role in that kind of wider picture. And so it varies between kind of like catch-up meetings to just kind of see where everyone's at. It's really good to obviously be aware of, if there's a new single coming out for a band with a video and XYZ, and digital marketing have decided that, this is the single that is going to appeal the most to their core fan base or whatever, and that's where they're pushing it and that's where they want people to see it, then, maybe that's something that then plays into how I'm approaching that aspect of the campaign. But I mean, to be completely honest, like most of my job is sending emails and checking time zones. Like it is still a job. And I think that's by no means me complaining. I think I have the best job in the world. I love it so much, but like it is a job. It is chasing people on emails and writing feature pitches or reviews pitches to various people to, again, like kind of to try and convince them that this is something that's worth their time. And you have to realize that these people are often being sent hundreds and hundreds of records all the time. So you have to try and, there is an element of kind of creative writing to try and find a way to put something across in the most appealing way to that person to make it stand out. But it's selling stuff into people and then just following up with them to try and see if you can get them on board. And then, if you do get stuff confirmed and you get features or interviews or whatever, then it becomes kind of like it's all scheduling, really. It's like you try and find times that work for the writer or the interviewer, as well as for the artist. Sometimes the artists are based all around the world, like got bands in Australia, Japan, South America, the US, like all of Europe, like all over the place. So you have to just stay on top of all these different time zones and where people are and where they're going to be on tour and all that sort of stuff. So it's not massively complex, but it is a lot of small little details that need to be correct. Otherwise things just don't happen. And that's always a nightmare when something gets missed or you make a mistake and get a time zone wrong or something, and then everything falls apart. But yeah, on kind of a day-to-day, it is just kind of a case of, I think it's just staying in touch with the wider team, with the band, with the managers, and making sure they know what's going on as you're pitching these things out and getting responses. Because also, like, if you get a negative response, it's good for people to know that, because then you know where to work or why that doesn't make sense for that magazine or that website or whatever. And then maybe if that's something that they really want to achieve, like often bands will say, we really want coverage with XYZ or this outlet because they did this cool thing with this other band. And then if for some reason that outlet says, I don't know if that's going to work, then it's good sometimes for them to have that constructive feedback so they can work on that for the next time that we're going to approach them for the next single or the next album or the next tour or whatever it is. So yeah, I know it's a bit vague and a bit all over the place, but there's not a defined structure, I guess, to a day-to-day. It is kind of depending on the day.
Very ad hoc, it sounds like.
Yeah, it is a bit. Yeah, yeah. But it's, it keeps you on your toes a bit.
Yeah. Well, I guess I think you kind of mentioned it there anyway, a little bit anyway. What would you say is your favorite, but also your least favorite parts of being a publicist?
My favorite part, without a doubt, is feeling like I get to have some role in helping these bands do what they want to do. Like I always said when I was getting into the music industry that like I mean, I know I said this earlier about finding the PR role description and just being like, that's something I can do, that works. At the same time, equally, there was an element of I feel like if I go into this part of the industry, I can have some genuine, valuable input on the bands that get noticed and the bands that I want to be able to help these bands and these artists because it is the thing I love, and I want to be able to help these people achieve everything that they can. At the end of the day, it's kind of on them, but if I can help assist or facilitate that in any way, like that's great. And you get to meet some amazing people, and that's not a like, you get to meet these like big names. I just mean like there's just a lot of great people that I think if you have a real interest in this sort of stuff, the chances are you're going to get on with a lot of people that do it. So, writers, bands themselves, managers, everyone that's part of this industry, like you get to meet some really like brilliant people. And it's a great little community, I think, especially in our little corner of the world where everyone kind of backs each other and like everyone, there's always exceptions. Look at every comment section on every social media post, but like the actual real people that put the time in and go to shows and support stuff, it's like, it's a good community of people that want the best for the whole scene as a whole. So yeah, it's really nice to just kind of have a hand in like just trying to help those artists achieve something or achieve what you believe they can. I think is the nice thing, is like seeing it through to that level. And then kind of on the flip side is, it's a job. Like there are some days where I wake up and I don't want to get out of bed because I can't be asked to go into work. But that is massively outweighed by everything else. Like, there are times where you'll pitch something and you'll be convinced, like, I know this band is incredible and they've got like a really cool thing going on. And I know they're going to be something, like you just kind of feel it. And other people won't see eye to eye and won't buy into it and won't, necessarily see it in the same way that you do. And that can be quite frustrating. But at the same time, it's such a subjective thing, music, that you can't ever sell something in really as like objectively, this is the thing you should be covering. This is the band that you should care about. It's all going to come down to how people view that within their space. So like it can be frustrating, but like that is again massively outweighed by all of the positives and all of the cool shit you get to do, and like get to hang out with great people, and I get to go to a lot of shows, which is my favorite thing in the world. So like, yeah, I really try not to complain, to be honest.
Just think about like all the friends you've made, and I guess like on the downside, it's just like any job that involves a computer and emails, you're chasing all the time.
Yeah.
I guess sometimes you'll even get people emailing you that kind of bother you, and I mean that in the sense of you're not even in the office and you're getting an email once an hour saying, have you got that pass for me yet? Have you got that pass for me yet? Have you got that pass for me?
Yeah. I mean, that stuff does happen. And like, it is one of those things where like, I very rarely think there's like ill intention behind it. So I try not to let it bother me too much. But like, it's when people message you on like your personal Facebook or something, like, and you know what the thing is, like, if you're someone that I know and I have an existing relationship with, I really don't mind that, to be honest. Like, it's just it's in this day and age, it's just another way to reach out to someone. I know other people that absolutely hate it, so fair enough. But like when it's someone that I've never heard of or met or anything, and they're just reaching out to me on like my personal social media on like a Sunday afternoon, being like, send me this thing, give me this pass, do this thing for me. There's nothing that makes me not want to help you more. Like I don't let that actually play into whether or not that person gets that pass or gets that interview or whatever, because at the end of the day, it has to come down to what benefits the artist or what makes the most sense. But personally, it really makes me not want to do it because it boils my piss, to be honest. But yeah, it can be pretty brutal sometimes. You get some punishers.
Well, what would you say, if someone listening to this who's, kind of interested in going into publicity themselves, like what kind of skills would they need? And what would you say in today's day and age, what path would they need to take to start taking those steps towards maybe getting into a role like that?
It's tricky, because I don't think there is a set path necessarily. I think it's going to be different for everyone that wants to do it and everyone that kind of finds their way into it. What I will say is, and it is a bit cliche, but is like, be passionate about stuff. Really show your passion. Don't be like maybe aggressively passionate about stuff. Don't scream it in people's face, but like go to shows, support bands. If you like the writing side of publicity, like, because you're going to have to write pitches and press releases and stuff, then set up a little blog or something and just write about the bands that you like, or, review records or go review shows you go to, or whatever it is. Like, just be enthusiastic and be involved, be willing to meet people at shows, or like online. I've met a lot of the people that I now know in the industry through Twitter or through Instagram or whatever. Like, just be willing to bond with people over that kind of shared love of music. And also just kind of like, I mean, this is something I say to everyone in the music industry, but I think there's this kind of, it almost plays into like an element of like imposter syndrome, I think. But if you get contacts, use them. If you meet someone that is a promoter for local shows in your area and you want to review shows, message that person, email that person and say, can I come along and to this show and I'll review it for my website? Or if you meet someone that is a publicist and then you're going for a publicity job and you're not sure if your press plan or your press release looks quite right, politely ask that person if they'll check it for you or if they have any advice. Like, I don't think I've ever met a single person in this industry that has refused to like offer that help or to give a helping hand to someone else, because everyone understands how difficult it is to get into this industry and that it isn't as simple as do X, Y, Z. There you go. You've got a job. Go ahead, enjoy it. You kind of just have to wade your way through until you see that opening and then take your chance and try and get your foot in the door. So yeah, like, meet people, make friends, be supportive of those people around you, and I genuinely think you'll see that back tenfold. And just, yeah, use contacts. If you meet people and they have expertise or they have knowledge or experience, ask them for help with stuff, ask them to recommend you for jobs, ask them to keep an eye out for internships or junior positions or whatever it is. And the reality is that even if you want to be a publicist, like, I think anything you can do in music, if you get a job selling merch at shows, or if you get a job like working the door at your local venue or whatever it is, like, anything that kind of gets you involved shows that you're willing to put in the time and effort, ultimately because you care about that thing. And I think that is always worth more than you can learn the day to day. You can learn how to write pitches. You can learn how to write press releases. I didn't have any experience doing that stuff before I got into this industry, into these jobs. But if you show that you're doing it because you genuinely care, like, I think people will have a bit more faith in you, that you're like willing to put the time in to pick those things up. So yeah, I think that's probably the essence of what I'd say, or what I have said, I guess. But yeah, just it's a tricky one. It is it's hard because there isn't one path, I don't think, unfortunately. Just try. I mean, before I did my internship, I went and found a list of publicity companies that worked with bands I liked, and I would just regularly email them once every month or two, and just say, do you have any internships? Do you have any junior positions available? I'd like to apply. If so, just super polite, super brief. They don't need to know your life story. Just let them know that you're interested. And the reality is that I didn't ever get a position or a role or anything through doing that. But it did mean that then when I met a lot of those people, they remembered who I was because they saw my name in their inbox every couple of months or whatever. Yeah. So, just make sure people know what you want and that you're trying to get there and that you're doing the stuff you need to do to get there. I think.
So I guess some people just expect like they'll do like a little bit of work and then they'll just wait for the position to land on their lap, and that's just not how it works in an industry like the music industry, where it's just so competitive, and especially in the niche of music that we're into as well, it's even more competitive because it's so much more.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think there's also a thing in our kind of music where it's constantly preached to you through bands and records and songs and stuff that if you believe in it enough, you can do anything, especially if you like punk and hardcore and stuff. And believe that as well. I mean, it's kind of worked out for me so far. And like, it is a competitive industry, and it is a shame that you have to be that tenacious and that relentless with trying to get your way in. But if it is something you really desperately want to do, just keep pushing for it. Just keep going, keep trying, follow every lead, every opportunity, like just do everything you can. Like, I know that sounds excessive, but probably the best way to do it, to be honest.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, in terms of you and kind of the future, 2024, what have you got planned in terms of band you're working with? I know you obviously can't tell me albums that are yet to be announced and stuff like that. What band can you tell me about that you're working with?
I'd tell you what is cool for me personally is, so the first extreme metal record that I ever purchased was an album called The Necrotic Manifesto by the band Aborted, which came out almost exactly 10 years ago. It was in 2014. And I'm now working on their new record, which is called Vault of Horrors, which is really cool for me. Like, that feels like a nice full circle moment. You know, it's like, I don't know, it's nice to look, nice that it's 10 years, nice that it's kind of that bookended thing. So that's really sick. That's really, really cool. There's a couple of records coming up that I'm really, really particularly excited about that I can't talk about. But if you like the heavier, more extreme end of the Nuclear Blast roster, which I really do, then you'll probably know what they are when they get announced. And they are amazing. They're really, really, really good. But yeah, all sorts of stuff like Profiler record, which will be out soon, which we've already kind of talked about that band a little bit. There's a new Comeback Kid EP, like loads of stuff. It's super exciting. And for me personally, I'm also starting to kind of make my way into A&R at Nuclear Blast and SharpTone,
cool,
which is quite exciting, which is very new. But I'm working on a few things there which are really interesting, and it's a nice kind of new frontier to tackle and a whole set of new challenges and new things to learn, which is nice after working in this industry for, you know, close to 10 years now. It's cool to have something new. So yeah, loads of stuff.
Yeah,
maybe too much.
So you're just kind of dipping your toe into that A&R kind of side of things, just seeing how it fits and if you did want to kind of pursue it a bit more, I guess.
Yeah, we'll see where it goes. Like, again, kind of what I was saying before, we're very lucky that a label like ours, we have a fairly sizable internal team. So there are those opportunities to kind of explore other avenues within the industry and within our space, I guess. But yeah, we'll see. Who knows if it will lead anywhere or if I'll decide to stick with it. But for the time being, it's very fun. So that's enough for me, to be honest.
I'm excited for you, mate. And yeah, good luck with that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And thanks for chatting to me. I really appreciate it. I know I've taken up about an hour of your time now. So
that's all right.
Plenty of emails waiting for you to be answering.
So, yeah, almost definitely. Yeah. But that's fine. That's fine. There always is. But yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's always good to chat to you, mate. And yeah, like I said, I've not seen you since, I think, was it May last year? I don't know when the last goal was, but something like that. But
a long time ago.
Yeah, before I let you go, have you got anything else you want to say? Any final words? The floor's yours.
I don't know, listen to Dua Lipa.
Why not?
I feel like I have to say that, right? It's my whole brand at this point. But no, I just don't know. I guess kind of on the topic of what we've discussed, like if you do want to work in music and if that's something that you genuinely like think is in your future, then just stick with it. It can be really shit sometimes when you're trying to find a job in music. I mean, to be fair, in this economy, trying to find a job in anything, like, they don't come up very often. But I really genuinely believe that if you care enough and you put the time in, that those things will come your way eventually. So just stick with it, I guess.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, yeah, thanks again for coming on. Hopefully I'll see you soon.
Sounds good.
See you later, dude. Thanks again.
See you later.
Take care. And that is it. Thank you so much for listening. Again, if you enjoyed this or any other episode of the podcast, then please leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to this. If you want to support the podcast further, you can go and give it a follow on social media, pick up something from the merch store, or subscribe to the Patreon to get early access to episodes. All of the links can be found at itsnotaphase.co.uk. That's itsnotaphase.co.uk. Thanks again, hopefully catch you on the next one, and remember, it's not a phase, it's a lifestyle.